Hey, folks, welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio. Thanks so much for tuning in. And I've said this many times, and I'll say it many times more. Thanks to all the new subscribers to my channel. I'm having a blast doing all these interviews as I have, talking about the Beatles with Beatles authors, people who have worked with them, fellow podcasters, in which case I happen to have one with me right now. Many of you know that in addition to my syndicated Beatles radio show, Every Little Thing, I'm the co-host of two Beatles talk show podcasts. One is a solo one, the solo Beatles, called Talk More Talk. And the other one is Things We Said Today, which has been available on the internet since 2012. And several years ago, we had a new member join us as a co-host. And I've known this friend of mine for almost 40 years. And it's been a blast having him on the show. He's been a fixture of New York radio for almost 40 years on New York's WFUV. So let's welcome DARREN DeVIVO to the channel. Hi, DARREN.
Where?
Right there.
Thank you. Ken has been wanting me to be here on Ken Michaels Radio for ages. And in one thing or another thing or one thing, this is a great moment because finally lassoed me or shot me with a harpoon and got me on board. But it's great to be on here. Anytime I could talk more about the Beatles, especially with you, Ken. Ken and I go back, if I remember correctly, we met each other for the first time. I guess it was technically December 24th. But I do not remember the year. A mutual friend of ours brought me to the studios of WXPS, which is no longer WXPS.
No. You got it. You got the call letters wrong.
XPN? No.
No, WXPS, that is the call letters now. That's for, wait a minute, WXPN, the peak. Or is it XPS? Those are the call letters now. When we got together, it was WZFM.
That's right.
And
that is right.
The station was in White Plains, New York.
Yes.
And I worked doing overnights there.
How did I get there? Okay.
Yeah. I really had so much fun being on that station. It was an adult contemporary station for that time. I did Sunday overnights into Monday mornings. And those were the days of Lionel Richie, Gloria Estefan, Barbra Streisand, Barry Manilow, Neil Diamond, solo Beatles at the time, the double fantasy material, the McCartney singles, Say, No More Lonely Nights, So Bad, all that stuff. Christopher Cross was big. Oh gosh, I love that time and being on the radio then. And we met there.
Right. A mutual friend of ours who I worked with in my earliest days at FUV, back when WFUV, I don't want to get into the whole history, but once upon a time, WFUV was a college station in a classic sense, where it was almost entirely run by students. We had a GM who was an employee of Fordham University. We had a chief engineer who was a Fordham employee. Everyone else, program director down, was all student run. So I want to venture to say that it was probably the 24th of December, and it probably was 1984-ish, that we came to visit you and hung out through a part of your overnight, which, you say it was a Sunday into a Monday. That I guess makes sense. That was when I met you for the first time, and we were going to do an interview with you. And it probably was for a John Lennon special. I think that I had actually been cooking up, and then he got involved at this was an FUV thing. And he said, I know this guy who's a Beatle expert, and he works at WZFM. I know him he knew you though from, I don't recall from, maybe he listening to you he knew you well enough to be able to set this up, and you had us both come over. And you were probably, I wonder if you were playing lots of Christmas music.
Could it be JC Hayes? J.C. Hayes, the program director
Oh, I don't
at
remember.
WZFM. He's a
I
big
don't
Beatle fan
remember.
too. Yeah.
So that's when Ken and I met each other. And after that, it was more, I think, accidental bumping into each other at the fest,
Mm.
at the back in the days when it was Beatle Fest, and time passed. So that was when how we met. And I guess that was late '84. And I was was that your first professional radio gig, or were you somewhere else? Because I know you
Well,
started out at what was it, WCWP?
no, no, no.
No.
I started at WNYT, the New York Institute of Technology, college radio station right there. And from there, I went to WDHA in New Jersey, where I did my Beatles show for 10 years. And while I was at DHA, I also worked at WZFM.
Oh,
Sunday mornings at DHA,
yeah.
Sunday nights at WZFM.
Yeah, I got you. Because I remember
Yeah.
listening to you on DHA. I lived in the Bronx, and while it was not the greatest signal to be picking up from northern New Jersey in the Bronx, I happened to have my dad had on our apartment building up with the television antenna. He had an FM antenna up there as well. So I
Mm.
used to pull in the distant FM stations, and I remember used to get DHA in loud and clear. And that changed though at some point. Who knows why? But anyway, now that we're done walking down memory lane, folks,
Actually,
that came from.
let me correct myself.
Yes.
WXPK should be the call letters now. It's called the Peak 107.1, and they are what they call a AAA formatted radio station, which is the same thing of what WFUV really is.
It's very similar. Your commercial version of what we do, and we're able, as a non-commercial, well, we've always taken this stance. We take more chances with what we play. We get a little more, not a bad, not the best explanation, a little more nichey, you know. So there's, but the Peak, for those not in the New York City metro area, the Peak is the station in White Plains, and the FUVs in the New York City metro area. And there's overlap, but there's enough of a difference between the two stations that we coexist. And of course, we're non-commercial and fundraise to raise money, and they're a regular. I don't know if that would be considered a small market when you're in so close to a major market.
That's tough to say, because when I was on WDHA, the thing that was so appealing, apart from being heard in northern New Jersey, was that you could be heard in the other boroughs. I did get a lot of people from, especially Queens.
Mhm.
Queens, I did get the Bronx, some Brooklyn, and I actually got Long Island, some people. Staten
Oh.
Island I got, and Western Long Island. And I used to live on Long Island, Merrick, and I used to be able to pick up WDHA, not always clear, but it was pretty cool to have that kind of a reach where it wasn't strictly just northern New Jersey, but you were heard in the outer reaches, getting
Right.
into the New York area. And we did show up, at least when I was there, in the New York book. Very low in the ratings
Right.
overall, and very high in the ratings in northern New Jersey.
Right.
So, but WZFM, those were good times. And by the way, the station before they were WZFM, they were WRNW, and Howard Stern used to work there. So it's the same radio station, different call letters, different formats. Yeah, a lot of history there at that station.
There's and also, and we're going to bore folks who don't understand where the station that is the Peak today, where Ken came from, and back in that time it was what'd you say, it was WZFM,
right?
And before that, WRNW. There's always been a thread connecting that Westchester County station with WFUV. There were so many people that either came from Westchester, the Westchester station, whatever the call letters were at the time, and came to FUV, or the other way around.
Right.
And there were people on staff at WFUV now who have roots going back to the, ZFM. And I believe the guy who was he's passed away now, the chief engineer in the 80s when I worked at FUV. who was the paid employee of Fordham. One of his earlier jobs was he was, I think, the chief engineer at WRNW, because he used to tell stories about the new up and coming guy, Howard Stern, and having worked with him.
Right.
So, there's that thread that has gone through the decades connecting WFUV with the Westchester County station, today known as The Peak, at 107.1.
Right.
So anyway, we
So,
digress.
yeah, before we start, just in case there's anybody watching this who followed me during my years on WDHA, I'm mentioning WRNW. At that radio station, when it was those call letters, there was another DJ there who I got to work with, who was one of the greatest people I've worked with in radio, one of the best voices ever. Curtis K came from WRNW. And unfortunately, he passed away last year. One of the greatest voices, one of the greatest personalities. So at the same radio station that we had Howard Stern, we had Curtis as well. So a little bit of an education for people who are familiar with my beginnings there.
So Howard Stern at WRNW was prior to, say, 1978?
I don't know the exact years.
Because when London Town came out in March 78, WNBC AM, which doesn't exist any longer in New York City, they played London Town on a Friday night. I think it was a couple of weeks before the album was to be released. And they did it on the 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. time slot, whatever the disc jockey was during that time slot, on a Friday night into an early Saturday morning. And I remember with my cassette tape recorder, the handheld mic, holding the mic over my clock radio every time they would start playing a new Wings song. And I, by the end of the 4 hours, had accumulated all of the songs that were on London Town. The next morning, I woke up to WNBC, which was not a station I listened to much. When it came to AM, I was old WABC. But NBC Saturday morning early, I woke up hearing With a Little Luck. And the jock that was on the air was Howard Stern, who came on and was making jokes about how WNBC stole the new Wings album. Yeah, I don't know if he mentioned that we played it last night, but that's when I realized that With a Little Luck was going to be, or the single, because it was then getting played again the next morning. But
interesting.
We digress again.
Yes, we could do that a lot. Anyway, so our show this time, we're going to do a Fab Five show. And if you happen to be a new subscriber to my channel, if you're not familiar with this concept, a Fab Five show is when I ask my guests to name 5 albums. One is a Beatles album. The other 4 are solo albums, one from each Beatle, that happen to be my guests' go-to albums for today. The albums that they would turn to the most to listen to. And they don't have to be the favorites of my guest or what they consider to be the best albums. They could be, but they don't have to be. So the way that I look at it is this: if you're going away on vacation and you're in a hurry and you got to pack the car and you still listen to physical media and you're going to grab CDs, you don't have that much time to think. If you're going to pick a Paul McCartney album or Wings album, whatever, which one would you pick? Same thing with John, George, Ringo, Beatles. So, and most importantly, you explain why these are the albums that you would pick for today. And these could change a month from now or a year from now. But for right now, what would be your Fab Five? And so for you, Darren, we're going to start with John Lennon.
And I like the way you put that. You're going to go away on vacation and you want to only grab one CD. When in reality, in my case, it would be your family has exiled you to an island, and they want you to take everything with you and get it all out of the house. No. John Lennon, Walls and Bridges. And Walls and Bridges, you know what? Walls and Bridges is probably my favorite Lennon album, although I understand the thinking behind why people put Imagine and John Lennon Plastic Ono Band up high on the pedestal. Those tend to be the two that are regarded as his best. And I've always felt that Plastic Ono Band is almost a difficult album to put up against some of his other ones, because it's the whole vibe of it is different. It's a different type of listen. You can make connections bringing Imagine, Mind Games, and Walls and Bridges together. For me, it was Walls and Bridges, and for, in this case, I don't exactly know why, except when John was murdered, it was a Monday night. I was 15 still, couldn't get down to Manhattan at all. It was like another. It could have been Jupiter. Manhattan was like Jupiter. I lived in the Bronx, only child, 15 years old. So, I wasn't about to figure out how I can go by myself down to Midtown Manhattan for anything. But by that Friday, after 5 days later, I talked my dad into driving me down to the Dakota. To put, I guess I remember it being only one flower. I had brought, because I had seen on the news all week long how there were flowers all over the gate outside the Dakota. So I wanted to bring down something. And the best I could do was wait till my father could drive 5 days later. And I think I went down with one rose with something hanging on it. And why this sticks in my head, I don't know. But there was one guy left. A lot of the crowd had been cleared away 5 days later. And the gates had been cleared. They had taken away all the flowers by then. So I had to give what I had to the doorman in that booth. There was one Lennon fan sitting by himself on the ground, leaning up against the concrete railing fence, and he was listening to I think it was What You Got was playing. And I had never heard What You Got. I didn't know Walls and Bridges. In fact, I don't think I owned a Lennon album yet, except for Shaved Fish. I think I went over to him and asked him, what was that you're listening to? And, he told me that's the only way I could have known that it was What You Got. I guess he told me it's Walls and Bridges. Must have had it on, it had to have been on cassette, I guess. And that stuck with me, so that when years later and I finally got Walls and Bridges, there was always something about that album that I connect to that moment in time. I
So
always
you attach music to certain memories.
I do that with everything, with music, really. Somebody digs out some family movies, and which recently we did, and it was like Christmas. Oh, let me just make up an example. Christmas 1968. Here's Darren, little 3-year-old Darren running around in his booty pajamas and his Santa hat on. And my mind immediately goes to the White Album was a month old then. That's Darren. That's me when the White Album was only a month old and there was no Abbey Road. These things kind of like blow my mind. And I'm like, if only I could go back to that, hang out with little Darren for a little while, and then go run to Sam Goody and buy like 10 copies of the White Album and bring them back today and have 10 mint sealed first pressing White Albums in pristine condition. So anyway,
3-year-old Darren didn't know better back then. So.
No. So yeah, I do attach these little things. Now, why hearing What You Got from this guy's boombox outside the Dakota? Why did that stick in my head? I don't know. But that made Walls and Bridges, I guess, kind of go up a notch or two for me, over Imagine. And Mind Games, I remember I needed a little time with. Mind Games didn't click with me right away. I liked it, but thought it was inferior, which now I don't necessarily feel that way. It's kind of old, but still, I'll always, when all is said and done, pound for pound, over Imagine, over Plastic Ono Band. It's also a little more listenable than Plastic Ono Band. I go with Walls and Bridges as my go-to.
Right. With Plastic Ono Band, it was such a deeply personal album and so intense and so raw That's not the kind of album that most people can listen to repeatedly. It's not a party album. It's one
Right.
where you really have to listen and just focus on the music and what John's saying. I mean, so much of John Lennon's music is personal, but he was bearing his soul,
Yeah.
on Plastic Ono Band. It is, in a way, yes, it's part of the catalog, but I could see how you differentiate that from the rest of his catalog, his solo catalog. But I also find it interesting, since you were a Beatle fan so young, that you just said that at the time of John's death, the only solo John album you had was Shaved Fish at that point.
Fish.
Surely you heard a lot of solo Lennon,
I knew the
as a,
hits. Well,
yeah.
I had the Power to the People single when it was brand new. It came out like the day before my 6th birthday.
Hmm.
Now, why? Well, I can remember why Power to the People resonated. I went on, I was with my folks and we went away for like a vacation. Um, and the jukeboxes in the resort we were staying in had Power to the People
Mm.
in there. And it was John Lennon and it was a Beatle and it was a Beatle connection. So I played Power to the People that whole time we were at this resort. I remember specifically the indoor pool. They had a jukebox,
Hmm.
and being in the pool listening to Power to the People. I had no idea what he was singing about. I didn't know what people needed power and what the power was being used for and what he was talking about.
Hmm.
I just liked the song. And when we got home from the vacation, my mom bought the single for me. And then I then I turned it over to Touch Me, and that was the first time I ever heard anything from Yoko. And that was a great way to torment my parents. Flip the record over and played at 78. That was anyway. So I had the Power to the People single, and I had bought a couple of other singles. I had Give Peace a Chance, like an import I'd order. I used to get things from this mail order record dealer that you might even remember because they were based on Long Island, LSR Records.
I remember, I heard of them,
And
definitely.
LSR, which was Lord Sitar Records. I somehow ended up finding out about them as a kid. I don't remember where, and I used to get their catalog and I used to order from them. And by the end of the 70s, I was beginning to start collecting. And I wanted to Give Peace a Chance because I had Shaved Fish, but you didn't get the full
Right.
version.
Hmm.
And I wanted it, so I bought what was a brand new in their catalog, and that was, I think, like a German single on Apple. I wanted the Apple. So I had like that, and maybe one other single. I think I had the Elton John band, the 3-song EP of when John came out at the Garden in '74, and I had that on the 7-inch, and that was it.
Hmm.
15 years old, I was limited on what kind of, how much I would buy because I didn't have a job, I had no money. It was handouts from mom
Right.
or my grandparents. And then when you only had very limited funds, you very selective on what you bought. I never bought Double Fantasy when it came out because I was a little leery. It was half Yoko, half John. I'm hearing "Touch Me" in my head, thinking I don't know. The funds are low. I've got to. I didn't necessarily get every release at that time.
Hmm.
So when he died, all I had was Shaved Fish. And then after he passed, I got Double Fantasy that Christmas because my folks went Christmas shop the day after he died, and my mother just made the assumption it's not on his list, but he's probably going to want this. So got Double Fantasy that Christmas, and then the next year, with maybe some allowance or something, maybe I had a job by then. I remember buying Imagine, Plastic Ono Band sometime in New York City at once.
Okay.
And so it's now the early 80s. And I remember Plastic Ono Band I was like bracing for because I had only read about. And what I had in my head was that it was going to be a loud, angry, abrasive album and bitter and mean and ugly.
Hmm.
And it was the exact opposite. It was at times pastoral, but it was stripped down. And at 16, I'm like, am I listening to the right album? Because this isn't like this death metal album that that I that I thought it was going to be.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, so Walls and Bridges. Yeah, but
But
I didn't know, and I also didn't. I don't think I owned a Ringo album yet when the '80s arrived.
mhm,
My center was always Paul and a little on the outskirts George, and I was then accumulating Beatles and learning in no particular order, just getting albums as Christmas gifts and whatnot, learning about the Beatles after the fact. But my world in the '70s revolved around Wings and
okay.
some George Harrison. Why George, I don't know, but it just also, you know,
All
George
right.
Harrison. So,
Just one
but
thing that, yeah, about Walls and
I'm just going
Bridges.
to say Walls and Bridges is my go-to for Lennon.
Yeah, apart from your memory of what you got and hearing it at that time, is there something specific about those songs that make you connect so well? Do you prefer the songs on there? Do you think they're
Yeah,
his strongest?
yeah.
You
Actually,
know?
I do. I think
Yeah.
that album holds up with. In fact, I think song for song it's better than Imagine, but it doesn't have that that impact that Imagine has.
Hmm.
Imagine had the title track and it had Jealous Guy. These were important songs. How do you sleep?
Give me some truth.
Completely different reason. Yeah, these songs that were like cornerstones in his discography.
Hmm.
Walls and Bridges doesn't really have those that have that sort of meaning. But if you listen through to my ears, to the melodies, just to the songs, not necessarily the messages, to me, as much as I Don't Want to Be a Soldier, it's a bit of a low point in Imagine, and there are
Hmm.
people who don't like it. I don't think Walls and Bridges really has that type of moment that I Don't Want to Be a Soldier on it. And I've always thought that It's So Hard was sort of a okay song.
Hmm.
So that to me, It's So Hard pulls Imagine down a bit. I kind of listen to these things and compare them like it's a scale,
Okay.
and to me, Walls and Bridges consistently, for my ears, really was his most listenable album, maybe my favorite, the one that I would go out on a limb and say, I think this one's the best.
Okay.
Even though, you know, Plastic Ono Band and Imagine, I get it. I get why they're where they are.
Right.
Um,
Okay. I know that for many years I said that I Don't Want to Be a Soldier was one of really two songs from John's solo career that I didn't care for. And
yeah,
nowadays I really like it more.
same thing with me. It
Yeah.
grew on me somehow for some reason. Um, it could have been an alternate take, maybe on one of the on a reissue that I really resonated with. I go, this is actually not bad.
Hmm.
As kind of, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't go much anywhere. The title is the comment. I don't
Right.
want to be clearly anti-war. That's all you need is the title to get the gist of the song. Um, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, I like it because it's a loose jam.
right.
And in that regard, it's so different from the rest of John's solo catalog, with the exception of all the experimental stuff he was doing with Yoko and Wedding Album, Unfinished Music
Right.
#2, that
Right.
stuff. I like it for that reason. I like the free form nature of it
Mhm.
and the fact that that's so different from the other songs that
Right.
John did in his solo catalog. All right. Let's hear your Ringo pick.
Ringo's hard because there are so many albums of Ringo's. Ringo's got both extremes. Ringo's got a handful of albums that I really don't like. I really think they're weak records.
Hmm.
I'm sorry to say. I mean, I'll listen to one of them right now, when we're done with this and enjoy it, but know that I could see why people tend to poo-poo this album. But then there's the other extreme. Ringo's got so many albums that are so enjoyable that really more people needed or maybe need to hear them. If they had come out maybe in the first half of the '70s, records like Choose Love and Ringo Rama and Vertical Man, and maybe to a little bit of a lesser extent, something like Give More Love, What's My Name, these albums would get a little more traction, I think.
Mhm.
had to come out closer to the Beatle time. And I think that some of those albums hold up, and pound for pound with second time. See how many times Darren says pound for pound. I think though a lot of those albums hold up with alongside Ringo, and maybe better than Goodnight Vienna, song for song. But the one that has developed in recent years, maybe over the past 10 years or 15 years, I Want to Be Santa Claus,
Huh. Okay.
because it has become one of my 2 or 3 favorite Christmas albums ever. You know, right up there with A Christmas Gift for You, the Phil Spector Christmas album,
Mhm.
and the Beach Boys Christmas album, you know, and a few other ones that are, you know, kind of jazz albums. Barbara Streisand's first Christmas album, which I grew up listening to at home. My dad had it. The classic one from '67, a Christmas album.
Mhm. Okay.
And now I Want to Be Santa Claus is right up there, right at the very top. I think if it wasn't Christmas songs, it would be amongst his best albums. I think his version of Little Drummer Boy is brilliant because he's the drummer boy,
Mhm.
and his personality is in that version. And I've played that more than any other song from that album on WFUV, just because he's the drummer boy. That's the one you should go to, right? Um,
There's a lot of real chestnuts on that album.
yeah, and his humor is in there. And what was it? What's the one he gives a bit of a Hawaiian flavor to? Is it White Christmas?
White Christmas has a reggae feel to it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That kind of like fun stuff. That's what in a way, that's what I miss Mark Hudson for, because as much as Mark Hudson's fingerprints started to get a little tiresome after album, his fingerprints on Ringo's records, they were great fingerprints because he knew how to take Ringo and put him in the best possible setting.
Hmm.
It was just that maybe that didn't vary. So from album to album, it was sort of the same vibe. And I miss that actually now. I Want to Be Santa Claus right in there with Choose Love, Ringo Rama, all those albums. And at Christmas time, which is a special time for me, and unfortunately I didn't get to listen to as much Christmas music this year for one reason or another. I've got a few hundred Christmas albums. I've got some Christmas albums. If I hit you with names, you'll be like, you have that, and I didn't know he or she did a Christmas album.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago's done a bunch of Christmas albums. I think a lot of people know that.
Yeah.
Did you know that Peter Cetera did one?
No.
Which is great. Neil Sedaka put one out not long ago. I got it.
Okay.
You know,
These are
I
the
love
things
Christmas music.
I look forward to hearing, something different at Christmas time. I don't mind hearing some of the same songs, but done by other people, just for something different to hear.
Mhm.
I love the classics like most people, but
Yeah.
I like hearing new Christmas songs. I want to hear more of that.
Right.
And I like hearing new arrangements of traditional songs and classic songs,
Right.
rocking around the Christmas tree and Jingle Bell Rock and that kind of stuff. I love that stuff too.
Right.
But I get a big kick because I get tired of hearing the same ones over and over that radio plays
Mhm.
at Christmas time. But yeah, I'm very happy to hear you say that about your pick for Ringo.
Yeah.
And you and I seem to have very much the same taste when it comes to Ringo solo stuff, because I've said many times, and a lot of this comes down to how radio programs us and how the stations that play the hits cater to a younger demographic. And gradually, as time goes on, as the artists get older, they phase out those artists, regardless of how good the music may be.
Mhm.
And in the case of someone like Ringo, albums like Time Takes Time, the albums with Mark Hudson, if those albums came out between 1971 and 75, there'd be loads of hits from Ringo because
Yeah, and it's
radio
not
played
hits.
him then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you'd have a couple of FM album tracks that made that made a little noise. Um, but because I'm such a fan of Christmas music, and I have such a big collection of Christmas music. I mean, one of the things that I did listen to a few weeks ago was, which I had bought a few years ago and just cracked the plastic on it. This year was the complete Christmas collection from Jim Neighbors. That
You
was
gotta have it. You gotta have that.
that. I mean, that's Christmassy. That I put that on, and I just smell pine in the air. But Ringo's album, because of that, because he's the only one to do a all Christmas album, and it's the one you go to in December. I'm not going to go grab Why Not and play that in December. It's like I Want to Be Santa Claus is the one that sort of ended up, you know. And again, it's an album that I think a very small amount of people know, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, it's very sad that when it is Christmas time, and I very much appreciate still hearing Happy Christmas and Wonderful Christmas Time, but radio stations, unless it's a Beatles show and a hip Beatles show, you're not going to hear anything from Ringo's Christmas album, which is a crime. I love the whole format of that album because it's half classic songs, half original songs that he wrote with Mark Hudson and members of the Roundheads.
I believe it's Christmas Eve, which
Christmas Eve is a great song.
Great song.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, there's Ringo's coming up with something that, I mean, I don't, all right, it's not going to be a classic. They're getting played all the time, but this is really a great song. Kudos to him because, again, yeah, Ringo needs to have a good cast around him that can support him and help him when needed.
Right.
He had it then, and the result was a really great Christmas album.
Yeah.
If you don't want to count Christmas albums, probably I would pick, just so as not to make an obvious pick for Ringo and pick Ringo, but I might go with Goodnight Vienna because it's like it's like Son of Ringo for me. And while the Ringo album gets all the attention, I'll go to Goodnight Vienna because the later stuff confuses me. It's all one big great album. Choose Love, Vertical Man. I end up sometimes not even knowing what songs are on what albums, but that's also old age. And so I Want to Be Santa Claus is my Ringo pick.
Okay. I just want to say before we get to the next artist, Christmas Eve reminds me a lot of Remember from Harry Nilsson.
Yeah.
It has that vibe. And
Yeah.
certainly, Ringo and Mark Hudson, big Harry Nilsson fans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Slow,
wouldn't surprise me if
melancholy.
they probably didn't, if they didn't sort of make reference to that when they were writing the song and, recording it, that didn't pop into their heads.
Yeah. Well, at the end of I Want to Be Santa Claus, I think they're saying, "We love you, Harry." So, yeah, definitely.
Well, but
It's either I Want to Be Santa Claus or it's another Ringo song. But they're big lovers of Harry Nilsson.
do we know what at the beginning of the album Ringo saying come in a bit more 51, bit more 50? What does he mean? Do you know?
I think that refers to one of the microphones being used.
Okay.
I have to go back. What the first interview I did on my chat? No, the second one on Ken Michaels Radio, I did with Mark Hudson, and I believe he talks about that there. So I'll have to go back and listen to what he had to say. Yeah, we did a lot of talking about Ringo in that interview and earlier interviews that I did with Mark Hudson, which are on my website.
Mm-hmm. I always thought he might have been calling on some aliens like Area 51, but
there's always that possibility too, if Mark Hudson's involved too.
A bit more 51. And I just made the connection that Pink Floyd has a song called Come In Number 51, Your Time Is Up.
Maybe it's related.
Ooh. Which is it like, if you folks know Careful with That Axe Eugene, it's basically the same song with a different title. But anyway, no, this isn't a Pink Floyd show.
All right. How about your go-to Beatles album right now?
That was the one that I really couldn't settle in on. It's going to be Abbey Road. Because if you're telling me grab one album before you go off on vacation to bring with you,
yeah,
Abbey Road would be the one I'd go. go with. What I had initially picked when because we're recording this in January, but we almost did this show about a month ago. We had a day you and I picked, and it's something didn't work out. I had scribbled some notes down and had put the Hey Jude album at the top of my list, but going more on a personal angle, because I believe that was the first album I owned of the Beatles.
Right.
I can still remember playing it on my show and tell phonograph. It came out a month before I turned 5. And I remember actually walking past a record store in the Bronx and seeing it in the window and pointing to it and my folks buying it for me. But if you're telling me that I got to go grab one album and take it with me on vacation, I'm not about to go digging out. It's on the US Beatles albums box set, I think. I'm not going to dig that out now to take one disc out of the box set.
Okay.
So I'm going to go with the readily available main catalog and Abbey Road. That was also one of my first Beatle albums. My dad brought that home with Let It Be in 1970. And they were sort of like those two records, those two albums were kind of like one and the same. You played them both in my house, Let It Be and Abbey Road. And this is another one, like at the beginning of the show, is saying I don't know why certain things stick, certain memories stick, certain things, the influence of certain songs or albums with me stuck all these years. But my dad had his stereo system. I had my show and tell phonograph. I didn't play my records on his stereo, and I didn't touch his stereo at that point because I was too little. I had my own, I had my own, and the Hey Jude album was mine, so I abused that on my show and tell. But Dad brought home Abbey Road and Let It Be. They went in his record collection to be played on the main stereo. He'd put them on whenever I'd want them to listen to them, and those two side by side, I remember as one entity. And Abbey Road used to blow my mind because of all the little grooves on the record, and they fit all of these songs and managed to put all that print, all that type in the white apple on side 2, and how weird this was, and watching really close the needle in the groove to see when it changed bands, so I actually, that's where that song ends and this one begins. Another song ended and began. I saw it move.
So when your dad bought those,
I was a nerd when I was a little kid.
So your dad bought those albums when they first came out, around that time?
Well, it had to be 70. So when Let It Be was probably brand new and Abbey Road was almost a year. Our copy, I remember, didn't say Hey Jude on the back cover. Not Hey Jude, Her Majesty, which was an indication of a first pressing. But I don't know about the label, if it had her. I think it did on the label. It said Her Majesty, I think. And again, I caught that as a 5-year-old. Where's Her Majesty on the back cover? Did it fall off? So Abbey Road, and I think Abbey Road's the greatest album ever made by any artist.
Really?
So
why do you feel that way?
Because I do. It's perfection. It's perfection. I was watching a video from a few years ago, just happened to stumble upon it, of the Fab Five doing most of side 2. I don't know. I think it popped up on Facebook. Maybe one of the members of the Fab Five might have reposted it on Facebook, and I stumbled upon it. And I was listening to it going, this is an incredible piece of music. The way that these songs just, it's flawless. You know when you feel something, when it goes, when you're feeling it deep, it goes down below your heart, and you're feeling it on the top of your liver, that, this is perfection.
Right.
And so I got to go with Abbey. The obvious one, I guess, with the Beatles, my pick would be Abbey Road, which a lot of people would pick as their favorite or the best. I think it's the best too. And I can understand some Beatle fans might like the a little more psychedelic, or maybe the more edgier sound of the White Album, for example, or the psychedelics, maybe a Revolver. Maybe Abbey Road's a little too slick for some people.
Hmm.
But I mean, the peak, he would have more peaks, obviously, but where McCartney was as a songwriter and as a musician is it's otherworldly, because a lot of the medley were Paul songs. And it's just, it's off the charts. It's insane. So good.
It's so amazing how those songs all just blended so well together the way that it did. And you realize that, all those songs were written as separate songs, with the exception of Golden Slumbers Carry That Weight.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then to learn how they recorded them, like 2 songs together at a time and piece them all
Right.
together. And they knew well enough to take Her Majesty out of the medley and stick it on the end. Well, that was John Kurlander, the engineer, putting that at the end of the tape, and then they decided, hey, leave it there.
Yeah.
Everything always seemed to work out when it comes to the Beatles, and it's a masterpiece, that medley. Side 1, some people might prefer side 1 over side 2, but if you love the medley, there's no doubt about how genius all that was. But for people who like separate songs, and especially to close with "I Want You, She's So Heavy," one of their edgiest tunes,
Mm-hmm.
so brilliant. You have an opinion about side 1 versus side 2? And
Well, to me, side 2 is just the greatest thing ever recorded, and side 1, I've never really thought of taking side 1 in itself. Side 1's also a near perfect side of music. I say near because there's some question with some tastes about Maxwell's Silver Hammer, possibly. Well, I mean, but you have Octopus's Garden. Second song Ringo wrote, and I'm sure he got a lot of uncredited help from George and the others. But I mean, Octopus's Garden was even like Ringo wrote one song, and now he comes up with this great, very Beatles pop song that fits perfectly.
mm-hmm.
Who are the gods that made these four guys come together? Over me. Sorry. Who brought these 4 individuals together? I want to talk to that God, because that was like, unreal.
Mm-hmm.
That they would all, and they all, the way they all jive together, and musically it all came together on Abbey Road and other albums. I bring this up. We have read through the years that John did not like Maxwell's Silver Hammer.
Yeah, well, to some degree, you heard that the other 3, other than Paul, didn't like it.
Okay, so here we are now, which we've talked about in past things we said today shows, how opinions, not opinions, how our perception of a lot of things involving the White Album and Let It Be, Get Back have changed with these reissues and now the Get Back movie.
Mm-hmm.
There seemed to be somewhat of an embracing. There seemed to be somewhat of an acceptance to Maxwell's Silver Hammer, where you even have John acknowledging it as a candidate to be on this upcoming album. In that bit where he's singing the song titles towards the end of the movie,
Mm-hmm.
during one of the final days, he's got the song titles, the songs that they're going to be the 14 to be on this album that never happened that way.
Mm-hmm.
Maxwell Silver Hammer is right in there, and John does not seem to be expressing any, Paul, we got to take this one out. You know what I mean? To the point where it makes me even wonder, how much did John dislike Maxwell Silver Hammer, or is this another thing that's, as the years went by, we've been told, but isn't necessarily true? Did I just make sense?
Yeah. Well, the thing
what I'm
is, with a lot of people, and John in particular, you can hear him express different opinions about the same thing through the years.
Mhm.
And, it's an odd thing. If you follow what Paul has said, every decision that the Beatles were to make was supposed to be a unanimous decision.
Mhm.
One of the biggest problems towards the end when they broke up is that the three of them sided with having Alan Klein as the manager, and Paul wanted the Eastman family to represent them. And the three of them signed without Paul. And yet Alan Klein became the business manager. If John and George and Ringo didn't want Maxwell Silverhammer to be on Abbey Road, then they should have voiced it. But it did go out that way, so they must have accepted it.
Mhm.
Or maybe they felt that because one of the Beatles' greatest strengths was that they had so much variety in the music, and different songs appeal to different fan bases. You may have certain songs that appeal more to girls than to boys, to a younger audience like a Yellow Submarine,
Mhm.
to more sophisticated tastes like an Eleanor Rigby, to wild and wacky psychedelic stuff that they did.
Mhm.
They had this incredible mix of music. I mean, I think one of the reasons why they recorded songs like Till There Was You and A Taste of Honey, was to maybe appeal to older people who knew show music,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, but that was a strength of the Beatles. And there may be lots of people who love Come Together and Something and Oh Darling, but Maxwell Silverhammer is a little bit too goofy,
Yeah.
But there's plenty of Beatle fans that love that song.
Mhm.
So therein lies the strength in the Beatles, was all this variety in the music, many different genres. Same thing with the Indian music. A lot of people didn't care for that. A lot of people didn't catch on to it or appreciate it till later on.
Right.
You know, that's the nature of all art. There's no final word on anything.
Exactly.
There's
Right.
so
Right.
much music that you didn't grasp or like when you first heard it, and years later, you have a completely different opinion and appreciate it more than you ever have before. So, you know, I definitely feel Abbey Road is a perfect album,
Mhm.
just like
Yeah.
you said.
Yeah.
But you could also make the arguments many Beatles albums were. So
Well, yeah, and really, Revolver was, and um, Sergeant Pepper was, and you could say Magical Mystery Tour, but it wasn't their album. It was a record company's album. But even there, Magical Mystery Tour is close to perfection. All right, maybe you want to say they could do better than maybe Blue Jay Way or Flying. I don't agree, because those are elements that make Magical Mystery Tour what it is.
hmm,
But that's also an album that's just about perfection.
I would say that about most Beatles albums, but
Yeah.
that's just me. Anyway, let's move on here. Let's go to Paul next.
Yes. Paul's easy. Band on the Run. It's always been my go-to. I think it's the best. It's easy for Paul. I think that's McCartney's best. Um, and it's my favorite. And I've got those tender childhood memories attached to it. Um, so it's like a no-brainer. Um, the one that I don't like it as I like it almost as much as Band on the Run. The one that would maybe be a surprise for some folks if I picked Red Rose Speedway. But in
Mhm.
recent years, I've decided that I know everyone says a tug of war and flaming pie, and you know what? Red Rose Speedway was one, and this is for personal, reasons. But Band on the Run, bit better of an album, I think. And that's my pick. That's close to being Paul's Abbey Road. The only complaint I have in general about McCartney's albums, and this is a blanket statement, and sometimes a lot of people, sometimes folks have said that Paul usually works best or comes out with his best work if he's got a collaborator or a filter nearby, sometimes to guide him away from a certain song or something like that. I
Mhm.
feel like, so even among the best McCartney albums. There's always that one song or two that you could kind of do without. You like it, but it doesn't, you know, it's the kind of song that probably if he had
Hmm.
John there would have been thrown to the side. Or a producer, maybe not a fellow musician, a producer saying, leave this one off, Paul, or this will be a B-side or something. Many of Paul's albums, in my opinion, have those songs, which keep them from reaching this, iconic Abbey Road like Sergeant Pepper like level.
Mm-hmm.
Band on the Run is the closest in my book to being the album that is as close to being perfect as possible for Paul post Beatles.
Hmm.
And I picked that over things like Flaming Pie and Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, mainly because Band on the Run, it's those personal childhood memories
Okay.
that the newer albums will never have. They can't. Band on the Run wasn't the first. Red Rose Speedway, I believe, was the first McCartney album I owned, and I had both of them on cassette. And that, as a result of that, they tended to come with me. When I went out of the house, I would bring maybe my little portable tape recorder and listen to those two albums.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can picture myself sitting with my little mono tape recorder listening to Band on the Run. So those memories are there for that album, and I think it's McCartney's best.
Okay.
So,
Is there anything in your mind where certain albums suffer from fatigue? I mean, in the case of Band on the Run, I sometimes equate that with Sergeant Pepper. I think, and I love Sergeant Pepper, and Sergeant Pepper is one of the greatest albums of all time to me, but I heard it so much. And I think,
yeah.
it got so much more attention being labeled the greatest album of all time. It was always #1 at polls. Everybody pointed to Sergeant Pepper as being so groundbreaking, the start of album rock, that incredible year of 1967, that a lot of other Beatles albums didn't get as much attention. And so a lot of people may gravitate more towards the other albums of the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I feel like, and this is just me personally, I'm trying to get your opinion on this,
Yeah.
but, Band on the Run is an album that I love to death, but I've heard it so much. And it's kind of like that.
It's off topic, but my second favorite band is Pink Floyd.
Uh-huh.
And I do feel that way actually about a lot of Pink Floyd albums, and that's only because of the way their very early stuff is very experimental, psychedelic, a certain type of progressive rock that you have to be in a certain mindset to want to listen to. You're not going to be sitting out on the beach, cracking open beers and relaxing and put on Amagama.
Right.
Okay. So it's almost like that's one catalog. Then the next catalog is the one where you got The Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall and Wish You Were Here. All right. And to a little bit of a lesser extent, Animals. And those albums to me are sort of worn out.
Right.
Or I played A Momentary Lapse of Reason so much when it came out in the mid 80s. 87, that I haven't listened to that album in years, and this is my second favorite band. So I feel that way about Pink Floyd, interestingly enough. With the Beatles, not so much. I mean, for some reason, maybe Revolver is an album I'm slightly tired with because I played it so much. It's so short, and it was always a quick go-to album because of its length and whatnot. I don't know. Just for some reason, Revolver, it's got a bunch of, I don't know. I'm thinking now that I've said that, I'm like, I can't really back it up with why. Fatigue.
This is something.
Most of the catalogs of the Four Individual and the Beatles, they don't have fatigue. That nothing that staying away from them for a couple of months wouldn't fix. Maybe a Ram. I think in recent years I may have played a lot of Ram, and now I'm all right with Ram for a while. But I wouldn't call it fatigue. But that's an interesting question. I don't feel it as strongly with the Beatles and the solo Beatles as I do Pink Floyd, or maybe, favorite bands of mine that have smaller catalogs where it's easy to get a little burned out on listening to them.
Mm-hmm. Because I know in one of our shows on Things We Said Today, you did say how much radio airplay and how certain songs are played to death
Yeah.
can affect the way you enjoy those songs now.
Yeah. But that's songs, not so much albums. Like lately, if I flip on the Beatles channel on Sirius XM, a lot of times, I'm thinking to myself, I'm actually a little tired with their mix.
Mm-hmm.
They should hire me to program them.
Or me.
Or you. I mean, we can work it out. I might change the channel when that comes on, and I love We Can Work It Out. But it's like, all right, can you play in Your Bird Can Sing a little more? Or Dr. Robert? So for individual songs, a little bit, like, I was never that crazy for Day Tripper or Drive My Car. I think I said that on one of our shows one time, and you were practically going to have me thrown off the show.
No, I was shocked, but
I just and now, like, when you radio and the Beatles channel is leaning a little bit towards being a little mainstream in the way they're thinking and programming. At least I think they are. If I hear, I'm trying to think of another good example.
Well, you said that you were never fully impressed with Yesterday.
Right. Well, that's a taste thing. That's where I just think the melody is unexciting of Yesterday. And yeah, I actually feel very strongly about how I think Yesterday is very overrated. It's just not that interesting of a melody to me, and lyrically, Yesterday all my troubles seem so far away, and now to today, and I believe in Yesterday. I'm like, Paul's written so many deeper songs, but Yesterday's been this one that. Why do I?
A lot of people connect with that. It's not just the melody and the words there, but certainly in the case of a song like that, having the string arrangement, added so much. It became a very sad, melancholy song, and it was striking for its time. And so many covers of that song.
Right.
A lot of artists have covered Yesterday, so
there's an instance
lots of people who love it.
I was an infant when it came out, so I only started hearing it a lot many years later. The impact of it being a brand new song in 1965 doesn't mean anything to me because I wasn't there. Hearing this pop band from England do this ballad with strings and whatnot, so that impact. And sometimes I feel like I missed out on that. I would love to have heard Revolver brand new out of the plastic when it was the day it came out, or Sgt. Pepper. Those feelings I missed out on. And maybe in the case of Yesterday, because I missed out on that, coupled with the fact that it's not one of my favorite melodies of Paul's, is why I don't, I really. When Paul would perform it live, it'd be like, all right, I know he has to, but this is where I'm going to check the score of the Mets game on my phone.
Okay.
Damn it, they're losing again.
Maybe that's why Paul hasn't done the song in recent years before COVID. He stopped doing it. He stopped doing it the last year or two.
I probably was aware of it at the time, but I forget now. I can't remember I think the last McCartney concert might have been Barclays Center for me, or the rebuilt Nassau Coliseum. Anyway, on the last tour.
All right, so
there's one left,
and that's George. And I made George the last one for a very simple reason, because I know a few times on Things We Said Today on our podcast show, you said that you felt that of all the Beatles, George has been the most consistently strong. with his solo catalog. So if that is the case, that might have been the most difficult decision for you if his catalog is that strong. Maybe,
No,
maybe
not
not.
really. In this
Scratch
case,
that theory then.
in this case, it's for me. It's like the expression, "You never forget your first time."
Hmm.
And in this case, it holds true for George. My first George album was 33 and a third. I think that, song for song, that's close to a perfect Harrison album. There's nothing on that album that's subpar,
Hmm.
and that extends to the fact that you can make that argument probably about the album George Harrison. I think you can make that argument with Living in the Material World.
Absolutely.
If you exclude the Apple Jam portion, you definitely can make that argument with All Things Must Pass.
Hmm.
And that's when I start breaking down all the albums. You start coming then to, even with Breath Away from Heaven and one other song on Cloud Nine, and those two songs, I think they're the Shanghai Surprise songs. What's the other one on Cloud Nine?
Someplace else.
Yeah, I think those are like those weigh Cloud Nine down. Those two songs. I'm not thrilled with those two songs, but even there, the high points of Cloud Nine are amongst some of George Harrison's best pop songs.
Hmm.
That's what made me think, you know what? There really isn't an album here that you can say, obviously, this album's mediocre. Maybe Extra Texture. Maybe. But even there, I listened to Extra Texture actually a couple of weeks ago. Maybe a little more than that, maybe around the time of the anniversary of his death. And I thought, you know what? There's only a couple of songs here, and it's mainly because they don't go anywhere. They're a little bland.
Which
This
ones?
is not that bad of an album either.
Hmm.
And so because if you don't include, well, of course, electronic sound and Wonderwall music and treat them as something completely different, I don't think George made a bad record. Oh yeah, maybe maybe Gone Troppo, you don't like one or two songs, or like me, Cloud Nine's got those two movie tracks that weigh it down.
Hmm.
But there are so many albums that George did that are close to being Harrison perfection. 33 and a third, Living in the Material World, George Harrison. There was a time that I used to think that highly about Somewhere in England. For some reason, it's dropped a little bit in my mind for
Hmm.
whatever reason. 33 and a third was my first George Harrison album. I had it when it was current. In 76, I was 11. Loved Cracker Box Palace and this song, and remember seeing the videos.
Hmm.
Probably on shows like maybe Saturday Night Live, but probably Midnight Special.
Okay.
When they would show the occasional pre-recorded video, and I think there's so much. It's also a lot of George's albums sound great.
Hmm.
You know, Dark Horse may be a little sloppy, and I always thought that Extra Texture sounded a little muddy. At least the first CD did. But so many of them, like great sounding records. Living in the Material World is, of course, All Things Must Pass. And 33 and a third is another great, well produced album. So that would be my pick for George. But yeah, no, but that would be my pick for George. It was my first one. I love every track on there.
Hmm.
Through the years, I've gravitated to different songs that are my favorites. I remember when I first got it, no, I'm getting mixed up now because I'm thinking for a while there when George Harrison came out, for a while Faster was my favorite.
Hmm.
But 33 and a third, love it. It's just, what else is to say? It's
No.
perfection for me.
Oh, I agree with you. Just about we have the same opinions here when it comes to George. I do think Extra Texture is probably his weakest album. Somewhere in England, I've grown to appreciate more, but Extra Texture's got so many high moments too.
Yeah.
So you can never totally dismiss any one of his albums. I mean, just to have the answers at the end, which to me is top 10 Harrison songs from his solo
Right.
career, deserves to be there for that alone. And Tired of Midnight Blue and Can't Stop Thinking About You and You. I love that single, that song. So yeah, I agree with you totally. Um, and there may be some people who think On Trapo is a great album. I think it's a great album. It's just that it was never promoted. George
Yeah.
didn't want to promote it. It was the last album he had to deliver at the time for Dark Horse and for Warner Brothers, actually.
Right.
So
I
yeah.
remember Don Troppo didn't I thought it was the weakest at first. I
Hmm.
don't think I got it when it first came out because it seemed like nobody did. Um, I got it some years later and thought, yeah, this is very hit and miss. Till one day it was like all of a sudden, you ever have that with any artist, that moment where it's like, this is incredible,
Right.
incredible. This is someone I'm hearing things I didn't hear before.
Hmm.
Cloud Nine was that for me. Don Troppo was that for me. You know, Today now it's for the opposite. I find that Cloud Nine and Somewhere in England, I play less. One album actually that I don't listen to all that much, and yet it's another one that is almost a perfect sounding album is Brainwashed. But that's
Hmm.
only because when I hear Brainwashed, to me it's a sad album because George was gone when this was done, and there are some songs on that album that Stuck Inside a Cloud just sounds so like he's in pain, not physical pain, but
Hmm.
he's grappling with the fact that the writing's on the wall and he knows he's not going to be around much longer. There's that vibe to that song.
Right. The lyrics
And
of
there's a
that
couple of
song.
others that
Look.
hang on the album on Brainwashed. This is George's dying album, and I
Hmm.
tend to forget about it when I'm talking about George's catalog. But it's like all the others. All right, maybe there's one or two songs you don't like as much, but that's a killer album too.
No, I hear what you're saying there. Stuck Inside a Cloud is interesting because George had written the song sometime in the later 70s. That was
Oh,
not a new
okay.
song. But yet lyrically, you can relate to it as being a song where there's some words in there that make you think he's realizing that this is the end of his life.
Yeah.
Same thing with Looking for My Life. That's another song on that album where you get that that's what George is thinking about as he's writing this.
Right.
Um, yeah, but it's very interesting. This is part of the joy for me in discussing the solo catalog and the Beatles catalog too, is that I've noticed in recent years certain albums have gained in stature. And we've talked about this on things we said today, and I've talked about it on the Talk More Talk podcast. A lot of the early McCartney stuff is getting recognized more now. I do think that George Harrison's solo catalog is being appreciated a lot more now. Not just All Things Must Pass in Cloud Nine, but people are recognizing a lot of his other works and also realizing that so much of what he wrote about, maybe you couldn't relate to as much when you're younger. A lot of his stuff is very philosophical
Hmm.
and very spiritual. And people can relate to that as they get older, I think.
Right.
And I do feel like, especially because we've had all these archival box sets coming out, it's given people more of a chance to reassess these works. So I think hopefully we'll be getting more of that where John's concerned, because we know that Sometime in New York City is coming out as a box set
Mhm.
this year. And there are intentions from the Lennon and Harrison families for all their solo albums from the 70s, at least the first half of the 70s, to come out as an archival box set. And as they do, it gives people more of a chance to re-examine these
Yeah.
works and think differently about it.
I'm in
So
a way looking forward to Sometime in New York City for that reason.
mhm.
What can be added to give us a more complete picture of that time that will alter, maybe change our opinion. You know, my opinion with Sometime in New York City is that it's Lennon's worst album. I feel that he really put live jam we didn't need.
Hmm.
To me that's fair fairly unlistenable live album. It's sloppy. It's especially the Zappa stuff seems like it's a free for all on the stage. It didn't need to be there.
Hmm.
And then so that weighs Sometime in New York City down. And I also feel like the production's subpar. Lennon has such a unique trademark, this production, and the main thing is that he muddies everything down with a lot of reverb, including his voice, which he would do on purpose. And I always felt that it got sloppy on Sometime in New York City,
Hmm.
where maybe there was a little too much weighing the sound down. If there would, and I said this on the show recently. To me, the songs are too much of the time. You know, they're 50 years old. I don't know much about, as much as I should know about, Angela Davis, or then there's John Sinclair. These are songs I'm having trouble relating to 50 years later.
Well, you know, there have been plenty of times when I've listened to songs, enjoyed them, didn't know what the lyrics were talking about, didn't pay too much attention to the lyrics. You even said that from when you were younger,
Mhm.
you know, and it didn't seem to matter. You just enjoyed them as recordings. And, you know, not to repeat what I'm saying too much, but whether or not certain songs lyrically sound dated or the subject matter sounds dated has very little effect on me.
Mhm.
I mean, I think I made the example of not that long ago, I heard Bob Dylan's Hurricane on the radio
Yeah,
for Hurricane Carter. That, you know, and I
that's
can
a great
enjoy that
example.
song. I can enjoy that song today just as much as I did when it first came out.
Mhm.
And he's, you know, he's not a major figure today. He's no longer with us, you know, and I can still enjoy it. You know,
Mhm.
one of my favorite R&B records is Ball of Confusion by the Temptations,
We should,
and they're talking about the Beatles in there.
right, but that's more.
Unemployment rising fast, the Beatles' new record's a gas. You know it's a dated record.
Yeah, but
Say, but I still enjoy it. So
that's
I
more.
don't understand why that matters, you know?
And I couldn't tell you why. Like Hurricane's a great example because to me, what Hurricane is about is timeless. Perhaps because of the civil rights part of it, um, that John Sinclair doesn't resonate today. Um, so maybe some of the songs actually do hold up because, like Sunday Bloody Sunday's fine. The event is a piece of history. We have U2's Sunday Bloody Sunday. Paul did give Ireland back to the Irish. The event, for, sometimes it's why does our mind grab at certain things and make certain opinions and certain
Hmm.
judgments. So now that I'm breaking Sometime in New York City apart, it's actually more maybe a handful of individual songs that are more of the issue that don't work as well. Another record some folks might be very familiar with, I think it's Lou Reed's best studio album is New York.
Hmm.
But New York's got some songs in there, including the one that's the obvious that pops into my head is Good Evening, Mr. Waldheim. Well, what was Waldheim's first name? I forget now.
Don't know.
Okay. Okay. It doesn't, that was 1989. It's like that. Some of the stuff he's singing about in New York isn't the New York of today. And it kind of, for some reason, not annoys me or bothers me, but it kind of takes away listening to it today. Some of Neil Young's stuff also. He's got an album called Living with War that to me is sort of a dated thing you put on the shelf. It doesn't.
Hmm. I
But
don't know.
Hurricane is a song, no. And Ball of Confusion, which is just off the charts great.
Hmm.
Um, and also recorded, I think, by the Undisputed Truth, right around the same time. In fact, I think the Temptations version was not the first one to come out. It was beat by a couple of months. Back in those
Okay.
days, all that Motown stuff was recorded by many artists, and they all ended up having hits with these songs.
Hmm.
To me, Ball of Confusion is a little more generic. That it's the same today as it was then. They're singing about the same thing. You know.
Okay. I can only speak for myself here. It has no effect on
Yeah.
me, whether
And
or not something sounds dated, subject matter wise. You know, woman is the end of the world is still relevant today, the way women are treated in our society.
right.
You know, I think, um, yeah, I could sing about people that I don't really know the full story to and love the melody of the song, love the words of the song, love the playing of the instruments. John Sinclair, I love John's guitar playing on there, the slide
Right.
guitar bits. You know,
Good point.
it doesn't make that big a difference to me. I don't understand. I have trouble understanding when people keep saying that, when subject matters are dated, that they have a problem with it.
So it's an argument you've heard before from others. It's not just
Oh, many times,
yeah.
you know, I can enjoy, and even when it comes to stylistically the music, when you know that a song production wise sounds of a certain time, if I enjoyed the song then, I still enjoy it
Mhm.
now. It doesn't have any effect on me. But that's just me. It
Right.
apparently matters to a lot of people. And as I've said before, I know that there are people that have written to me that as much as I love the Beatles' early music, to some people, that's very dated.
Mhm.
You even said it yourself on things we said today. You really don't want to hear a song like Please Please Me because it sounds like it's from another time zone.
Yeah.
And when I hear it, I still love it the same as I always have.
Mhm.
She Loves You. I mean, come on. There's no band that's out today that would record a song like She Loves You. And I still
Mhm.
love that song. I'm not making fun of it. I don't think any less of it because it comes from a different time period. There are songs come from the 50s, just from the sound of it. There are songs that come from the 60s from the sound and the production of it. Same with the 70s. If I loved it then, I still love it now. I don't,
Mhm.
the production angle is not as important to me as the quality of the songs.
That's good. I mean, because sometimes that uh, what the songs sound like does affect and has affected my enjoying of it years
Hmm.
later. I'll remember, there was a time that I couldn't get this off my turntable, but now I'm not so much in the mood to hear electronic drums. You know, I always said that Press to Play was one of Paul's, and we both agree with this with our opinions of the album. One of Paul's most underrated,
Hmm.
miss um not interpreted, but just
Not appreciated.
not appreciated. Thank you. These are hard words. Um, but now when I listen to it, well, no. Now I have less of a desire to put it on because it's a little too mid 80s sounding for me right now. I've got these 20 some odd other albums of Paul's that I'm
Hmm.
going to play. I just had a better idea pop into my head. I'm a big Chicago fan.
Hmm.
And I've tried very hard through the years to stay kind of into what they've done even in recent years. I'm not the biggest fan of where they went from the mid 80s into the 90s, the ballads, and they need to get into that. But when Chicago 17 first came out in 1984, that was really the album where David Foster sunk his teeth into Chicago, and
Hmm.
we started getting synthesizers and programs and electronic drums coming into the mix, and it sounds. But when that came out, I just thought, hey, this is the same Saturday in the Park, feeling stronger every day band, just with drum machines. It's the '80s, man.
Hmm.
Get up with the time. Now I can't listen to of Chicago 17 that much. It just sounds too much like you know, it's too dated for me. But I don't feel that way about everything.
Hmm.
Now I'm rambling.
It's hard to figure out, but all that I'm saying is if I liked something before in the past,
Right.
And I always love Press to Play. I still love it.
Yeah, Press to Plays. Yeah, I do too. And there's a couple of songs on there I can understand why people don't like them, and then don't like the album. Talk More Talk, Move Over Busker. Those aren't easy songs for the masses to embrace. But take those songs and put them in that context. I really like what Press to Play did. Probably because I thought it was an album that Paul needed, I felt, to make a very strong album. He had had a couple of hits, say, and whatnot, that kind of were pigeonholing him as more of a pop act in the 80s, and his albums were not getting paid to as much, weren't being paid as much attention.
Mm-hmm.
He needed, I felt, in the mid 80s, an album that was going to be the 80s version of Band on the Run. And while Press to Play wasn't that quality wise, it's a ballsy move. It's a very different album from anything that he was doing at the time. At a time when he maybe needed an easy, surefire hit, he came out with a rather eclectic, non-commercial sounding album. And I think that's what appealed to me about it. There was a lot of things that were not typical of Paul. Is it his best collection of songs? Probably not, but taken as one unit, I really liked the way the whole experience of listening to the whole album, which made things like Talk More Talk, songs that maybe on their own I wouldn't have liked much, but within the context of where it is on the album, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I could do so many shows on Press to Play, and probably will.
Right.
But
we probably have about 3 shows here alone. Right?
We'll end this real soon. But throughout the entire 70s, Paul, for the most part, produced himself, except where George Martin came in a few times and Chris Thomas co-producing Back to the Egg. But after the trilogy of albums with George Martin, he finally stepped out and worked with, a pretty hot producer for the time, with Hugh Padgham.
Yeah.
And so, I kind of admire Paul for not wanting to always have the same sound over and over and over again.
Right.
And yet, in this day and age, right now as we speak, a lot of people are hearkening back to his 70s sound. And for a lot of people, that sounds more contemporary, more his true self, maybe because he was, in most cases, the sole producer. That is his pure sound. It's more of an organic sound. A lot of people love his DIY stuff.
Right.
For that reason. McCartney 3 got lots of praise for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of fans have some of them, not all of them, because we all have different tastes, but a lot of fans kind of get turned off when another producer works with Paul and puts some of their own sound into his recordings.
Mm-hmm.
And some fans would rather go back to what made Paul famous in the first place, the sound he had in the Beatles and the sound he had in the 70s when radio played him the most. Of course, that doesn't mean that his best music was in the 70s. Right. That's all a matter of opinion. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. We all have different opinions, and I've enjoyed you sharing your opinions here on this show. And of course, you can catch Darren and me and our buddy Allan Kozinn on our Things We Said Today podcast, which comes out bi-weekly. And if you haven't ever caught those shows, I'll give you the link to that for our YouTube link. And Darren, this has been great.
Yeah, well, thanks. And I apologize that it took so long to corner me and get me on the show. Ken's been asking more than a year, I think. You got to come on, and it just goes into the file cabinet in my head and it gets lost. Like a lot like everything else. So I'm glad it happened, and hopefully I'll be back on again soon. And we have a show. We're actually going to be making our first Things We Said Today in about a week and a half from right now.
Right.
Did we decide what we're going to talk about? I forgot already.
No.
Oh, that's why I don't remember. So
we've got to come up with something soon.
We have a couple of ideas that we've mentioned, but it looks as though, all of a sudden in a period of 2 days, there's like 5 physical items getting announced that we could talk about.
It's a lot going on in the
Right.
news.
So just when you
Yeah.
thought it was going to be quiet, sometime in New York City, get back on Blu-ray, get back in the movie theaters, the Yoko Ono tribute album, and
Uh-huh.
so
Books from Ringo and Olivia Harrison. It's a lot going on right now. We don't have a chance to rest.
actually, I have too much time to rest. But that's
So,
right.
Darren, thanks so much for doing this, and
Thank
I
you.
hope to have
Thank
you
you.
back on as often as you like. I
Thank you.
enjoy having my fellow podcasters here on my channel, the ones that I work with on my 2 podcasts, and other people who do Beatles podcasts and have YouTube channels. So thanks so much for sharing your Fab Five with us. And thanks to all of you for watching this. Please subscribe if you haven't done so. Please subscribe to the Things We Said Today podcast and the Talk More Talk podcast. Darren's saying
right.
definitely Things We Said Today.
Things we no both of the things we said today first.
Okay. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.